What is our common bond truly? Freedom!
I hereby declare this to be an unlawful assembly. I order all those assembled to immediately disperse.
And it's the only thing that it's all about, nothing else.
The old way is in the certain process of destruction, and a new world order is beating down the door.
Much of what we are living through now actually comes from what happened in Italy in the 20s and the 30s, where you saw the clashes between the fascists and the Marxists there. And that's where Antifa comes from, the anti-fascists, people that wanted to go after the Mussolini regime.
Leon Trotsky, creator and leader of the Soviet Red Army, formed the first Antifa-type units, groups of armed paramilitary thugs used to suppress opposition to communism in the years leading up to the Bolshevik Revolution. The Antifa concept was so successful that Trotsky spread it through Italy, Germany, and other European countries the communists were targeting for takeover. Antifa gained fame in the years prior to the Nazi takeover of Germany in 1933. The German Communist Party and the Social Democrats set up Antifa units to wage war on Hitler's street thugs, the brown shirts.
From an ideological perspective, it's a sibling rivalry. Hey, we're the thugs around here. No, we're the thugs. Hey, we're the gangsters here. No, we're the gangsters. Hey, we're the tyrants here. No, we're going to be the tyrants.
After the Nazis destroyed Antifa and the Communist Party, many former left-wing militants switched sides to the Nazis.
It would make sense they would switch sides to the Nazis because they have the same exact plans. They have the same exact schemes. They have the same exact devices. The only difference is which group gains control. And so ultimately, if the other group gains control of this battle of the wills, if you will, then, if you can't beat them, join them.
One internal SA report claimed that 55% of the brown shirt ranks were former communists or socialists. They called them beefsteak Nazis, brown on the outside, red in the center.
Lampe, Missouri was a place where I heard George Bush and Bill Clinton talking, where from the point of view I had, they certainly were friends, and they didn't recognize any party lines between them. That's something for the, a smoke and mirrors illusion for the public. It's not something they adhere to because they had exactly the same agenda, and that was for bringing in this new world order. I heard George Bush talking at that time. He was talking to Bill Clinton, and I've since photographically recorded it and wrote it verbatim in our book, that when the American people became disillusioned with Republicans leading them into the New World Order, that Bill Clinton, as a Democrat, was going to be put into the office of president. This was decided in 1984. Actually, I'd heard about it even prior to that, but that, as of 1984, they were already discussing it as an absolute fact.
So I wanted to finish the thought here. And for one break, we have to hit live. It's an around the world break. Hard to believe we're being watched in 151 countries. Crazy. Ted Turner changed the world. I'm a big fan of yours. He would serve you after. I don't know. Only surprise. He's ready. What's he got left in the game? After you're elected, think about it. No dope. That's for sure. Great guy to work for.
Cincinnati, where he ran into the SDS, which was eventually turned into the Weather Underground Group. which is a domestic terrorist group from the 1960s and 70s. My father was the only FBI informant that was able to penetrate this group when they went underground. He was their runner. He would run messages between the Central Committee and other groups. And so he knew what the main characters in that group were doing at all times. He watched them plan bombings, watched them plan many acts of violence, and Antifa reminds me of the Weather Underground, just 30 years later.
So one of the leaders of the Weather Underground, who I know your father knew very well, was Bill Ayers.
Yes.
The famous professor from Chicago.
Yes.
Who mentored Barack Obama.
Yes.
Bill Ayers is involved in the leadership of Refuse Fascism, one of the main Antifa groups nationally, actually.
Yeah.
A front for the Revolutionary Communist Party. How does that make you feel, seeing that man who your father knew back then as a terrorist, now leading Antifa today?
Angry. I'm angry. This man should be in jail. Him and his wife, Bernadine Dorn, they should both be in jail. They should not be out. It makes me angry because he's out there pushing this, but not only is he out there pushing this now, he's been allowed to push this in our schools for decades. And I firmly believe that his teachings, just him and the liberal teachings, have made Antifa what it is.
Once an undercover FBI informant inside the terrorist Weather Underground organization.
This violent revolution they want to bring about for social justice and peace. But how are they planning on bringing about social justice and peace by putting bombs in places where they would kill innocent people?
Well, these guys actually believed that they were capable of overthrowing the government. They honestly believed that they were going to succeed, and that the only way to accomplish this goal of creating a communist society and government here in the United States was by strategic sabotage.
I was curious about your stance on capitalism and what you think is
hate it.
About
Abolish it. You want me to elaborate the point? Down with capitalism.
I prefer the word progressive, which has a real American meaning, going back to the progressive era at the beginning of the 20th century. I consider myself a modern progressive.
In America, almost all major Antifa violence has occurred in cities where the police are reined in by far-left, Democrat-controlled city councils. Boston, New York, Washington, D.C., Charlottesville, Virginia, Portland, Oregon, Oakland, San Francisco, Berkeley, California. We found evidence of considerable Antifa Democrat interaction. Sometimes the ties are personal.
Among those Choi says committed crimes, Linwood Kaine, the son of former Democratic Party vice presidential nominee Tim Kaine. Linwood Kaine will have to appear in court to face charges for fleeing on foot and obstructing the legal process.
Wall Street too. Donald Trump is screwing you.
Linwood Kaine fought the police and had to be restrained with a chemical spray. In some cities, Antifa has actually penetrated the Democratic Party. In Orlando, Florida, Dylan Tyre leads the Antifa group Knights for Socialism, which is completely controlled by America's largest Marxist organization, Democratic Socialists of America. Dylan Tyre serves on the local DSA Executive Committee. His chairman, Adam Whitmer, doubles as a field director for the Florida Democratic Party. Often, Antifa is funded and trained by Democratic Party allied labor unions. Such is the case in Portland, Oregon.
Mr. Clinton studied at Oxford in England. Most of his professors there described themselves as Marxist-Leninists or socialists. In early 1969, Clinton was called to London for a physical examination and was classified 1A, which meant Vietnam. Upon his return to Arkansas, Clinton drove to Fayetteville to the home of Colonel Eugene Holmes, commander of the Army ROTC unit at the University of Arkansas, where he begged to join the program. Clinton signed a letter of intent and gave a pledge to enter the university law school. In the fall, he returned to Oxford, where he would help organize demonstrations against the United States outside the American embassy. On December 2, 1969, in violation of his promise to enroll in the ROTC program, he applied to Yale Law School. On December 3rd, he wrote a letter to Colonel Holmes stating, quote, "Because of my opposition to the draft and the war, I have great sympathy with those who are not willing to fight, kill, and maybe die for their country," unquote. Mr. Clinton was described as a moocher and with no apparent income. Yet he left England for a 40-day trip to Scandinavia, the Soviet Union, and Czechoslovakia. Clinton stayed at one of Moscow's most exclusive hotels, the National. Clinton went on to Prague, where he stayed with Oxford friend John Kopold's parents, who were leaders in the Communist Party. The grandfather was a founder of the Czech Communist Party and a member of the party's Central Committee. In fact, Communist Czechoslovakia had been a training area for international terrorists. Shortly after Clinton's return to America, his friend Jan Kopold died mysteriously when he fell from the upper floors of a derelict building in circumstances that were unclear. Another close Clinton friend and a fellow draft dodger at Oxford was Frank Aller. When he returned to Spokane, Washington, he was found shot to death in September 1971. His death was ruled a suicide.
Just be grossly generalistic. You could put half of Trump supporters into what I call the basket of deplorables. Right? The racist, sexist, homophobic, xenophobic, Islamophobic, you name it.
This is called concept creep. Activists expand the meanings of words to advance their agenda. To Antifa, fascist now means anyone who opposes socialism. Racist means anyone who voted for President Trump. There are two steps in this process. First, vilify and dehumanize your enemy. Second, destroy your enemy.
Senator Obama's campaign has also accused the press of mischief-making related to another Obama associate, one who lives just a block or two away.
Most Americans, if you told them their neighbor had set bombs, even if it was a long time ago, would probably be a little unnerved by that.
On the morning of September 11, 2001, readers of the New York Times found these chilling words: "I don't regret setting bombs. I feel we didn't do enough." Spoken by a forgotten American radical, they would later come back to haunt Senator Obama. In 1995, future Senator Barack Obama was feted at a fundraising event in his Chicago neighborhood. The event was hosted by William Ayers and Bernardine Dohrn. In the late 60s and early 70s, Ayers and Dohrn were the leaders of a violent terrorist organization, the Weathermen. The Weathermen participated in more than 20 bombings over a decade. Ayers admits to bombing the New York City Police Headquarters, the Capitol, and the Pentagon. In 1981, 4 people were killed when a Weatherman robbery of a Brinks armored car went awry. Ayers stated the Weathermen's philosophy as follows: kill all the rich people, break up their cars and apartments, bring the revolution home, kill your parents. That's where it's really at. After 11 years on the run, Ayers and Dohrn turned themselves in. Subsequently, they were acquitted due to tainted evidence from illegal wiretaps. Said Ayers, "Guilty as hell and free as a bird." When the association with William Ayers was brought to the senator's attention, his response again never really settled the question of his judgment.
This is a guy who lives in my neighborhood, who's a professor of English in Chicago, who I know and who I have not received some official endorsement from. He's not somebody who I exchange ideas from on a regular basis. And the notion that somehow, as a consequence of me knowing somebody who engaged in detestable acts 40 years ago when I was 8 years old, somehow reflects on me and my values doesn't make much sense, George.
Barack Obama really couldn't bring himself to say, you know, I really don't like that guy.
You know, kids are out of control today. Duh. You know, I was out of control a few years ago myself.
That was too much for him to say. He had to talk about what a decent fellow he is and what a good professor, and how he's worked on education policy. Well, you know, Hamas has a widows and orphans fund, but that doesn't change the fact that their day job is creating widows and orphans.
The Obama-Ayers relationship goes further back than the 1995 political coming out party at Ayers' home. Obama was chosen as chairman of the board of the $50 million Chicago Annenberg Challenge. Ayers wrote the grant that founded the CAC and would have been closely involved with Obama's selection. They appeared on panel discussions together, and they served as directors of the Woods Fund together. Obama's affiliation with Ayers is made more troubling by the fact that neither Ayers nor Dorn are in any way repentant about their terrorist past.
Barack Obama is saying, well, take me at my judgment. Well, your judgment puts you in bed with Ayers and Jeremiah Wright. You know, what more do we need to see to say, you know what, this may not be the judgment we want in the Oval Office?
That a person continues to sort of build relationships and alliances with people who turn out to have nefarious backgrounds. That ought to give one pause.
The ideology of communism, the ideology of sort of those people in the 70s that you mentioned were out there in the streets. For a great part of the United States, certainly in the Democrat Party, those people that were out there in the 70s, Bill Ayers comes to mind, are now tied to the highest levels of the Democrat Party, the highest levels of the U.S. Senate, the highest levels of the U.S. Congress. They find themselves in many places. George Soros, you know, Wall Street, a billionaire. And so having this amount of money tied to those ideologies is now, we're now seeing that even though, okay, the government, the infrastructure of the Soviet Union, certainly, but the ideology of communism was not defeated.
When we were in Portland, there was actually Antifa training that was happening Saturday before the rally in Portland on Sunday. There were posters planted all around Portland that our guys got pictures of. They wanted me to go in, and we were going to try to send a couple of our people in there just to find out what they're doing. And I was willing to do it. I said, okay, but I didn't make it in time. So they tried to send a couple of other people that I know in there. They immediately were stopped before they could even get up the driveway. What's interesting is that the training happened at the
Labor Union building.
Yes, it was going on there, and then one of the Antifa people, of course, they all have, you know, bandanas on their face, so you can't see who it is. He said he wanted to make it known that not only did they own that building, but they owned 3 or 4 blocks, like the whole, you know, all around there. That our guys needed to get out of there, like right now. Very organized. It was very, very organized. It wasn't a cheap looking building. It was very nice from what I saw the pictures. That's not college kids just protesting. There's money behind these people, lots of money.
While researching the funding of these radical groups, I came across information from the Capital Research Center. $50,000 was channeled to refuse fascism through the Communist Party-aligned Alliance for Global Justice.
They received a $50,000 grant, which if you trace it back through sort of a liberal group, then a progressive group, then a globalist group, it actually goes back to the Open Society Foundation and George Soros. It's funny because it's almost like getting a game of whack-a-mole with George Soros, but it really does tie back to him in a lot of cases.
I sort of look at Antifa as the ultimate Cloward-Piven plan. They're like the ultimate expression of the Cloward-Piven plan. And if you know that analogy, these were 2 professors at Columbia University in another era who took a look at America and realized she was never going to knowingly adopt Marxism because there's just too much freedom and prosperity out there. People aren't going to give that up without a fight, right? You know, so instead, overrun the system with victimology, overrun the system with bureaucracy so that the system collapses. And then they feel as if they have no alternative but to turn to government to save us. Antifa is after the exact same thing. Create enough chaos in the streets, create enough bloodshed in the streets, people lose faith in their government. Chaos is the friend of the Marxists.
One internal SA report claimed that 55% of the brown shirt ranks were former communists or socialists. They called them beefsteak Nazis, brown on the outside, red in the center.
George Bush is a communist. I mean, he's nationalized more companies, private companies, than Hugo Chavez has, as far as I know. Certainly in greater wealth those companies are than the ones that Hugo Chavez nationalized. Right now, America might have more nationalized private companies. Well, they're no longer public. They've been nationalized by George W. Bush, the communist, than Russia does. It's unbelievable. You think I'm kidding? I'm not kidding. He just nationalized a couple of weeks ago Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae. They're gigantic. Their effect on the economy is valued at about $1 trillion. Okay, now that's not their net effect, not their net value necessarily, but their effect on the economy. And he just put out an $85 billion loan to bail out AIG, the largest insurer. And it's not just a bailout. We bought AIG as the taxpayers. Congratulations, you're now the proud owner of AIG. The American taxpayer now owns 80%. To be accurate, 79.9% of AIG. We are the majority shareholder. Now, I don't know what we're going to do with it, but we bought it. I guess if this is a new version of the Colin Powell rule. If they break it, we own it. And that's what's happened here. That's funny because I remember conservatives and Republicans saying, oh, yeah, socialism, health insurance, oh, we don't want socialized medicine in America. And what is tremendously ironic is now the only insurance in the country that has not been nationalized is health insurance. Because all the rest of the insurance is what AIG covers. They're an insurance company. So the government can run all the insurance except health insurance. That would be socialized medicine.
After a deluded gunman assassinated President Kennedy, after a deluded gunman assassinated President Kennedy, after a deluded gunman assassinated President Kennedy, long before he arrived in Washington, Gerald Ford's word was good. During the 3 decades of public service that followed his arrival in our nation's capital, time and again, he would step forward and keep his promise, even when the dark clouds of political crisis gathered over America. After a deluded gunman assassinated President Kennedy, our nation turned to Gerald Ford and a select handful of others to make sense of that madness. And the conspiracy theorists can say what they will, but the Warren Commission report will always have the final definitive say on this tragic matter. Why? Because Jerry Ford put his name on it, and Jerry Ford's word was always good.
For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed. It conducts the Cold War, in short, with a wartime discipline no democracy would ever hope or wish to match. Nevertheless, every democracy recognizes the necessary restraints of national security. And the question remains whether those restraints need to be more strictly observed if we are to oppose this kind of attack as well as outright invasion.
Chelsea and Ivanka Trump have been pals for years, and they have reportedly agreed not to let their parents' rivalry spoil their friendship. Both are pregnant. Ivanka is 34, Chelsea 35. The two have reportedly arranged a play date for their newborns after the election.
Hillary Clinton, I think, is a terrific woman. I mean, I'm a little biased because I've known her for years. I live in New York. She lives in New York. And I've known her and her husband for years, and I really like them both a lot.
I knew Donald Trump. I represented New York. I got to know him.
You were at his wedding?
I was at his wedding.
You guys were apparently friendly. I know he said he told Greta Van Susteren that
Right.
he something to the effect of, I don't want to get his quote wrong because I'll be killed by him. He said he thinks you're a terrific woman and you were doing a good job, which is a bold thing to say about Hillary Clinton on Fox News. But now you guys are running against each other, and he says you're the worst Secretary of State in the history of the United States.
Shortly before Trump announced his decision to run, he received a mysterious phone call from Bill Clinton.
I didn't get a phone call from Bill Clinton before I jumped in the race. Did any of you get a phone call from Bill Clinton? I didn't. Maybe it's because I hadn't given money to the foundation or donated to his wife's Senate campaign.
As The Hill's Brent Badowski writes, if that phone call was about how Trump could act as a spoiler for the GOP race, Clinton would have told Trump to do everything that he's done since. Personally attacking other GOP candidates, alienating Hispanics, drowning out the message of new and fresh candidates. Check, check, check.